Hey everyone, thanks so much for joining us today for Cybersecurity Readiness Imperative in 2023. We've got another minute or so for people to join, but I'm going to go ahead and just introduce myself. I'm Corey Underdown. I'm the content manager here at DNSFilter. I know we're all really busy, so I am going to get us started right on the dot. I'm here today with Cobalt CISO Andrew Obadiaru. I hope I'm saying that right. I practiced. And DNSFilter's principal security researcher, Peter Lowe. In a moment, I'll have them introduce themselves, but first there is a little bit of housekeeping. This session will be recorded and you'll receive the recording today in your email. Also, there is a chat box on the right side of your screen, so feel free to add any of your questions you may have right there. We'll try to answer your questions as we go, but we will also have a dedicated Q&A at the end of the session. So that's all I have for right now. I'm going to ask Andrew, can you please introduce yourself and share a little bit about why you're so passionate about cybersecurity?
Thank you, Corey. My name is Andrew Obadiaru. I'm the CISO for Cobalt, responsible for information security as well as IT and everything related to protecting Cobalt as well as our client sensitive data. Security, I've been in security for close to 22 years. So obviously over the years, I've built a significant passion for security. And there's this feeling of satisfaction you get when you understand issues and you're able to come up with solutions to mitigate them. So it's never boring. It's one new challenge every day, different from the previous one. So there's always something tapping into your curiosity and really getting you into a mode of wanting to come up with solutions. So yeah, over the years, I've built that passion and it's still there, hasn't gone away yet. So very happy to be here, Corey.
Very cool, thank you. Peter, now it's your turn to introduce yourself and share a little about your passion for security.
Well, I didn't know that you were going to ask that question, so I haven't got anything prepared. But yeah, my name is Peter Lowe. I'm the principal security researcher for DNSFilter. I kind of fell into security. I was a web developer for a long time. I was interested in security, and I've done some forensic investigations before, and I've always found it very interesting. So yeah, when I got the opportunity to focus on security, it was yeah, jumped at it, and I've loved it so far. So I'm really enjoying it. Like Andrew, though, I do like solving problems, and I tell you what's nice to be on the side of the good guys, because there is so much terrible stuff happening. Like every day, there's just a torrent of new techniques and attackers out there, and being able to actually help make the internet a safer place feels good. So yeah.
Well, first up is the question I think everyone really wants to know the answer to, and that is, what are your cybersecurity predictions for 2023? I'll let Peter go first.
Well, I think the general one is everything's just going to get worse, but then that's nothing special. That's like every year. But I think a couple of things. I think we're about due for an IoT kind of a cyber apocalypse. Like I think that there's going to be some kind of major event happening this year. I don't know, like a botnet or some kind of like IoT ransomware that might get released, or I don't know. But I think the number of devices that are being added every day and the continuing terrible cybersecurity level for IoT devices is kind of ripe for some kind of big event. I think that's maybe one of them. And I think also maybe there might be something similar with the car industry. There's been some research done lately about the kind of vulnerabilities that are in the cars that systems run and the systems around them. And they're really kind of basic things. So I think that might be something that attackers start looking at.
Those sound pretty major. Hopefully they
well, we'll see. We'll see. Last year, a couple of my predictions were cyber nuclear war, which didn't quite happen, but with the whole Ukraine thing, sort of came true, and a major attack on a password manager, which unfortunately came true in the worst possible way, the last pass. So I hope I'm wrong this year. I hope I'm like dead wrong, but we'll see.
Fingers crossed. Andrew, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with most of what Peter said. I think to me, I look at it from the perspective of organizations, right? How does this really change? But when you look at 2022 and now 2023, I don't anticipate significant change in terms of the landscape, what kinds of threat, what kinds of issues we'll see relative to cybersecurity. But I do know one thing: as this trend continue to go up, I expect organizations to invest more in cybersecurity insurance, right? Because the threats that we see today, the breaches that we see today, are becoming more and more sophisticated. So it's no longer a question of if, it's more of when, and usually the scope of it is hard to tell. So having that issue to mitigate potential liability coming out of that, I see a lot of organizations going that route. In terms of specific threats, I mean, I would expect that phishing campaigns, social engineering to kind of continue to flourish in 2022 for the simple fact that there's a financial gain, right? And the more I expect in 2023 for that to become much more sophisticated, right? Over 2022, we've seen some very good sophisticated phishing campaign. I expect that to continue to happen in 2023 because it's that increased desire to have this financial gain out of it. So that's going to be a serious motivation for most cyber criminals. So, those are the kind of things I think, and then the traditional stuff that we've always seen. Ransomware is not going to go away, right? If you look at the trends in 2022, the payout were probably in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. Now, at the later parts of last year, relative, I think Gartner had a report out. Now we're looking close to $1 million in terms of payout, and that's not going to change. I think it makes it much more difficult for security practitioners to cover those kind of risks. But as long as it's increased financial gain, there's going to be a lot of these things I don't expect it to go away. And the market trends, the macroeconomic situation obviously is not helping. So folks are going to look for other ways to gain the system and look for financial gain. So yeah, those are the things I expect in 2023. Yeah.
So I've got a question for you, Andrew. Do you think that I totally agree, cyber insurance is going to become much more common. Do you think that's going to make it easier for ransomware actors to get their money out? Like they're going to target people with the insurance because they know they can get paid?
That's true. I don't expect you to get it because the insurance companies themselves, they stipulate a lot of requirements for you as an organization. You're not just going to be able to, slam the cybersecurity policy and think, yeah, I'm good now, right? So when you write a cybersecurity policy, there's an expectation you have to get as an organization to determine what kind of coverage you get. If your systems or your processes are significantly lapsed, most insurance companies are not going to want to sign it because the risk becomes too much for them to deal with, right? So I think there's still an expectation of you as an organization to do more within that space to show up your controls, to build up your defenses. So it's not just going to be, hey, I have insurance now, it's all good, let them come to me kind of thing. It's not going to be that way. There's still an expectation. To your point, it might get riskier for insurance companies, right? If this continue to go at this pace, we may have a situation where you're not going to be able to write a policy because the risk is just too much for them.
That's all very insightful, and it kind of leads me into my next question of what security preparation suggestions do you have for 2023 to kind of mitigate some of those threats?
I think for me, every year there's a challenge. So I would encourage organizations as we go to 23 to have a clear indication of what their critical assets are. If you don't know what your assets are, you can't protect against them, right? And in addition to that, what risk are you most susceptible to as an organization, right? So every organization has a different risk posture. If you're in the financial sector, it's a different calculation for you. If it's in a highly regulated environment, it's a different calculation for you. If you traffic in a lot of client data, it's a different calculation for you. So having that understanding, I think the critical aspect of it is to understand what are your critical assets. What are your current jewels of that organization? What are you looking to protect the most, and how can you go about that? Making those determinations will put you in a position to understand your risk exposure and what can I do to mitigate that risk. I think the first thing you have to do is to conduct what we typically refer to as cybersecurity maturity assessment, and that gives you a better sense of your security posture, where you need to do better, where you need to show up your control, because you can't there's not a blanket approach to it, right? So you have to have a targeted approach to mitigating your risk. So part of it is understanding where am I most vulnerable. Identifying those spots of vulnerability would allow you have a targeted approach to mitigating those risks. Because the budget is not there most of the time to have this kind of big umbrella approach to mitigating your cybersecurity risk. So understand at a very visceral level what your risks are and put you in a better position to mitigate those risks.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's definitely important to know, what you've got and how to protect it. Like, what's the most valuable assets you've got, including like digital assets as well, like where the risk is. I think, honestly, I don't think there's going to be any change in the kind of advice I would give anybody this year as compared to like last year or before. I think the standard things like educating people against phishing attacks and things like that is a kind of a core thing. A lot of it just comes down to human error, and it's so difficult to keep constantly vigilant. I've almost clicked on a phishing link before because they come at the right time, and you're expecting a DHL delivery, and you get an email from a DHL fish, and you think, oh, okay, you click it without thinking because you're distracted or something. But yeah, so constantly reinforcing that, it's not safe on the internet is a good thing to do. And I think a couple of things like layered defense is always something that's important. Don't just rely on one product or one service. Put in multiple layers there to protect yourself against the different types of attacks that come out there. There's no silver bullet in cybersecurity. There's no one thing that you can do which is just you can tick a box, you're fixed. So yeah, and I think, well, I mean, this is probably more relevant a couple of years ago, but the switch to remote working and working for the hybrid work environment, it's looking at like a zero trust architecture is a good thing to do, but that's not really going to be applicable to everybody out there. So in general, layered defense and education are the two things I would say to.
Yeah, I just want to add to that. I think you're 100% correct that the human element of it is the most difficult part to protect against, right? Because you could do all the awareness you want to do, and when it comes down to it, you just don't know how that individual will act when faced with a sophisticated phishing campaign. So the hope is that you could continue to train and educate them and hope that all of these simulation exercises really stay with them, because it comes down to judgment. Like you said, no matter how sophisticated you are, some of these things are so good that you can still fall prey to it. So I think the best thing is to prevent, build up your filtering system to prevent it from even coming into your environment, right? Because if you rely on the end user, 9 out of 10, you just don't know what state of mood, what mood they're in, how they're feeling that day, whether they're prepared to do any kind of exercise, good judgment, you just don't know. So I think for me, in as much as we invest a lot in awareness program, but it's also trying to build up a defense system, the filtering system to ensure that, to the extent that you can, you want to cut a lot of those from coming into your environment, because when it comes in, it's really anybody's guess at that point,
Yeah. What's frustrating, I think, is that so many of the organizations out there which should be helping us, like the banks and payment systems and delivery companies, they seem to be impersonating fishers half the time. Like the stuff I get from my bank, honestly, it looks like I genuinely don't know, is this from my bank or is this someone trying to scam me? And my bank has this thing where they send out regular emails about like, hey, beware of any scams. And the email itself says, we will only send you links which take you to informational pages. And then there's a link that sends you through some random domain that they've registered that tracks your clicks and everything. And it's not sending, it's like, come on, guys, you can do better than this.
That's why it's challenging. The more sophisticated, sometimes you can't even tell. I mean, we've had situations where the company could not tell the difference, right? Whether this is actually their legit logo or some kind of, they just said, well, we'll just take some time off and evaluate that, because they couldn't tell us definitively that this was some kind of bogus logo. So, you just have to sometimes, you just hope for the best. You can prepare as much as you can, but you just don't know how individuals will act when it comes down to it.
We should probably mention the developments in AI as well, which I think, especially for phishing, are going to be a kind of a game changer. Like with spear phishing, with targeted phishing against individuals, trying to impersonate someone that they know and trust, being able to like accurately impersonate someone automatically is it's going to be something to watch out for. I don't quite know how we're going to protect against that. I mean, I think a lot of the standard protections are still going to be useful, email protection and just being aware, but like, it's going to make things hard. It's going to be interesting to see what kind of things they come up with.
Yep.
Are there any
Yeah.
industries that you think are needing to be more prepared or more of an umbrella kind of mitigation as opposed to just finding those things that are specifically important to them?
I think, obviously the financial sector, e-commerce companies, the risk is obviously high for them because of the kind of data they traffic in, right? If you're operating, credit card, you're collecting credit card information, you're collecting bank information, the risk posture for you is totally different from a guy across the street who's selling pizza, right? So I think, understanding that the burden is always high on those people because not just the risk of it, but also the liability that comes with it. So I think organizations like financial sector, financial companies, pharmaceutical industry where there's high regulation for them, the highly regulated environment, there's fines from government, there's fines from, protect data organizations like GDPR or even CCPA. So organizations that are impacted by this regulatory requirement tend to approach their risk mitigation a little bit different because the risk obviously it's significantly higher for them if something goes wrong. Other companies that tend to worry more about reputational impact. These financial institutions, reputational impact is big for them, but also there's an actual real financial implications for them. So, the way they approach security and risk is different it's going to vary from organization to organization. But the organizations that have the biggest lose obviously will have more stake in building up their security posture.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Again, it's all about the risk. For me, the one is healthcare, because people's lives can actually be at risk, and there's kind of real human impact. Um, some of the stories that we've heard about hospitals getting shut down through ransomware and stuff like that are kind of tragic. The problem is that healthcare, a lot of healthcare organizations have a smaller IT budget. They don't have the kind of money to spend on like a full, a suite of cybersecurity protections. They don't have really good network defense. And again, it's somewhere where they need to deploy the kind of the lower cost but easier to use protections. And also they have, I think part of it, especially with ransomware, healthcare organizations are more likely to pay up because of the risk. And also because they're more likely to have insurance, I think. And I think they're a prime target. Although we have seen this year at least one ransomware gang who kind of apologized for attacking a hospital, and then it's funny that the ransomware guys are care about their reputation. It's a bit weird.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think in general, healthcare organizations are a sort of a prime target.
No, I completely agree with that, especially hospitals with the level of equipment they use now. Almost literally, the equipment are doing everything doctors used to do. So, and people with all kinds of devices implanted in them, and these are all IoT related.
Yeah.
So if you hack into something, you could essentially, cause significant damage to that patient population. So I think the hospitals are especially at risk for those type of, particularly from a ransomware perspective. So they don't want to leave themselves exposed to those types of attacks. So yeah, you're right. Healthcare is a different calculation, not just the money aspect of it, but also potential implications for them from a patient care standpoint.
Yeah. And I think also with things like double extortion, where people get threatened with not just the encrypted data or the encrypted systems, but releasing the data that's been found on the networks. That's the kind of patient data is very sensitive, and it happened in Australia where the list of people who'd had abortions got released as a kind of a threat to say, and people who've had mental health issues and things like that. It's really horrible, but it's an effective threat. It's much more likely that you're going to get someone pay a ransom if you're threatening to release that kind of data. It's pretty horrible, really.
Absolutely. Yep.
So I'm going to pause for a second and I have a poll for the audience that I'm going to pull up, and then we can move on to the next question. Let's go fast if I can get everyone to answer that question real fast, and then we can move on.
We don't get to answer that question ourselves.
I know, we're not allowed, I guess.
Okay.
I see them, the answers are rolling in, so I'm going to give it just another minute.
Okay.
Everyone to vote. All right. Going to go ahead and close this poll. So the question was, as I'm sure you guys saw giant on your screen as well, but do you feel as though your organization has a strong security strategy for 2023? And it looks like 54% of our attendees right now answered that not quite, their security stack could use a little bit of beefing up. And that kind of takes me to my next question of, say an organization is ready to beef up their security, what should be their initial focus?
I think for me, again, back in the day, security used to operate almost as a silo, right? But in today's world, you can't afford to operate in a silo anymore. You have to be aligned with the organizational objective or strategy. So I think the first thing you do is where does security fit in a larger scope of things relative to the organization, right? So what kind of business are we involved in? How does security add value to that process? So once you're able to make that identification, then it becomes a lot more easier for you to figure out how do you build a security strategy and what are some of the initial processes you have to go through to lay out this process. If you don't have a stake in the organization of work, or you don't have a place for security to play a role, then it becomes a lot more challenging. Then you just take a basic template and just do what you feel you need to do, right? But if you understand at a very detailed level how the security ties into your organizational objective, and then you can now build a process around that from a security standpoint. One, to support that effort. Two, to mitigate any kind of perceived or real risk to your organization, and then what specific items you must have in place. So I think for me, the first thing to do is to first understand from a business standpoint, how does security play into that process? What can security do to add value? What are our critical assets that we work with? How do we begin to protect that? What's the organization's crown jewel? If these processes or assets are breached, what are the implications for us as an organization? Are we in a regulated environment? Do we have to meet any regulatory obligations from a security standpoint? So having all of this understanding will certainly allow you to build a foundational piece and identify the right framework for your organization, and then you can start to build from there.
Yeah, I think that, yeah, embedding security into kind of like everywhere, like the practices of the company, like the ethos of how they operate, because pretty much any aspect, any process in a company can be a vector for an attack. Onboarding, hiring, reviews, any kind of process, all the kind of side bits which maybe don't get as much attention. And going back to Andrew's point earlier about assessing where the highest risk you have inside the organization, map out your assets and say, okay, what's the most valuable bits we've got? Where are we most at risk? That's going to be important as well, and it will help highlight where you should start spending your time and attention. So yeah, but again, I think if there was one thing to look at, would be education. Because most things come down to human error, and not just education, but just so I think there's two benefits to training, which is you obviously are teaching people how they can be compromised and how attackers work, but also just keeping it in people's consciousness, keeping it like something as a reminder that you're doing it once a month or something like this. So that kind of stuff is really useful to have going on.
What are some of the common mistakes that you think are made when it comes to implementing a cybersecurity strategy? If you start out looking at those things, what mistakes are coming after that?
I think what I've seen, what I've seen in my experiences, in my days as a consultant, is that most organizations don't take the time to build out a true assessment, right? They make an assumption on what's in place, what's not in place, or you bring somebody in there that says, hey, we're going to implement NIST 855, whatever it is, or ISO 27001, and without evaluating how this can be part of the environment, right? Why are you going with ISO 27001 as against NIST or as against CIS, this different framework? So organizations get in there either because they are in a business situation where a client is pushing them to have one framework as against the other. So most organizations don't take the time to conduct that initial assessment work needed for you to understand what your risk posture is that will typically drive your security posture. So if you don't understand your risk exposure, then how do you begin to mitigate them? So if you just set up a series of framework, and then you implement controls, you're not going to be able to evaluate those controls effectively against your environment, because some of those controls may not even be applicable to your environment. So I think it's important as a first step to conduct an assessment. And failure to do that, and you just have bandages across everywhere, right? Because you really don't. You're not taking a very deep approach to it. You don't understand where you're vulnerable. You don't understand. The assessment will give you true insight into your security environment, right? Where the vulnerability exists, what you're doing well, what you're not doing well, what is needed to protect the assets that you have. I think, not doing that initial assessment certainly leaves you open to having something that would not sustain a true audit or even a true compliance assessment.
Yeah, that's pretty much what I was going to say, actually. I think the kind of checklist approach of, we've done this, tick, we're safe now, is the wrong approach. It has to be something which really kind of goes into to everyday practices and doesn't go away. Attackers are constantly coming up with new ways, new methods, new techniques to be able to compromise systems. They've got, they are effectively companies themselves, and their profit is successful attacks. So they have a development team and a research team working on new stuff all the time, so that they take advantage of changes in the market. So it's sort of like a competitor to you, and you're never going to stop working to create a better product or a better service. So if you start slacking off, that's when you're going to get hit.
Very true. Very true. Yeah.
So there's additional risk too if a company has employees that work remotely, right? So what are some things to consider for that kind of security for employees that are working from home?
Yeah, I mean, remote. Sorry, Peter, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Andrew. Cool.
So remote first obviously has tremendous benefit for the employee, but there's also significant security risk, right? Having people work from home, now they're working in different networks, with different systems. You don't know how secure that is. They may or may not have a well thought out internet provider, a secure one, right? So that by extension leaves the organization wide open. So on one hand, I think organizations, if you are doing either remote first or some form of hybrid that encourages folks to work from home, you have to fortify your perimeter security, whether it's through some kind of sophisticated VPN system, where you force everyone to go through VPN. And then for those mobile devices, maybe implement an MDM, for instance, to prevent them from just being able to, circumvent organizational security, perimeter security, because through mobile devices, there's a lot you can do that could bypass what you have in that would be difficult for you to do from your device. So I think the key is to, educate them, as Peter said before, also implement a good VPN and compel everyone must have a good VPN policy in place that you can authenticate into this environment without going through a VPN, and then implement basic security measures, complex password, two-factor authentication, et cetera, et cetera. So I think there's ways, to mitigate that. It's just so much that would happen in a remote first environment or remote environment because you don't have entire control. You have control over your device, you have control over certain things. Putting agents in your device will certainly help mitigate some of that risk.
Yeah, I think one of my favorite things is a zero trust architecture, where you don't trust any device. Well, you assume that any device that's connected to a network has been compromised until you've done some kind of verification that it hasn't been. There's a lot of different ways to implement that kind of thing, but it's just a way of being able to kind of use services collaboratively, but without you mitigate the risk, and it also kind of segments your areas so that if there is a successful attack, then the impact is limited. But yeah, pretty much what Andrew was saying with the VPNs and that kind of thing is yeah, it's a different way of working. And I think even though we're like, I don't know, 2-3 years on from when the whole shift to remote working happened. Oh, not for some companies, DNSFilter has been remote working since before the pandemic. I don't know, is Cobalt remote as well?
Yeah, Cobalt is remote 100%. Prior to the pandemic, it was kind of like hybrid somewhere. We had a couple of months.
Okay.
The pandemic, it became like, everyone is remote essentially.
Yeah, so when the kind of big shift started happening, I think there's still people catching up. There's still people kind of trying to figure it out. Just because I suppose the traditional office environment has been so embedded in the way that we think about things, and remote work was such an exception before that. So I think it will still take some time before these kind of strategies fully mature, but the best I've seen at the moment is to go for a zero trust architecture.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the challenge with zero trust is not every company can afford it, right? The smaller
Yeah, that's true.
trust. So I think going with some of the basic measures will be helpful as a starting point.
Absolutely. Yeah. Sorry.
And that kind of leads me to a question for you, Andrew, about budget. How does an organization or someone in an organization fight for security budget in 2023? And what kinds of things do they need to bring to the decision makers to get that budget approved?
That's a good question, Corey. It's a different skill set for most security people. They're very challenged at doing this because the tendency is for you to approach those discussions from a technical standpoint, right? There's a series
Yeah.
of
Tell me about it.
if you go to the board or the exec with, a VP and use all these technical jargons, you are going to lose them. Oh, we need to protect our endpoint. We need to do this. We need to do the same. They're not. It's going to go over their head for the most part. Most executive teams or even boards typically don't have that level of technical know-how to be able to appreciate the implications of that. So what I've done in my experience is to really focus on the risk, right? Bring it down to a language they would understand, and not just the risk, but also get into the implications of that risk. This is what would happen if you don't mitigate this, right? And to the extent that you can, add dollar amounts to that, right? So if we get compromised, if we don't have our endpoint secure, and this data is compromised, this is a potential a hit we're looking at, a couple of $1 million, or this could potentially impact our pipeline. If you're a security organization, you provide services to your clients, and your data is not secure, or their data is not secure while it's in your possession. If you go to the board and say, hey, we need to buy, CASB or whatever it is, all these different cloud security measures you need to implement, and they may not fully understand that. But if you tell them that, hey, that project we're pursuing with XYZ clients, if this happens and we end up on CNN tomorrow, we could essentially kiss all of that goodbye, right? So I think, presenting in a language that will understand, articulating that risk in a way that makes sense to them, and to the extent that you can add dollar figures to that, even though it's not as accurate as you can. Certainly we drive the message home for them. What does a breach mean to us? What is the cost of a breach to us as an organization? And these are the implications for that. So a CEO would understand that very, very easily when you start to talk dollar terms to them. But if you just focus on 10 vulnerabilities we have to mitigate and you spew out those vulnerabilities to them, they're like, hey, we'll come back to that at some point. The risk is never truly understood. But if you bring it down to a language you understand, you make it about dollar terms, and you articulate that risk in a way that makes sense to a non-technical person, and they certainly will be able to hear you out properly. And it may require one or two conversations, not at one time, right? But I think the key is for you to be prepared and understand the risk, not purely from a technical standpoint, but what that risk means to your organization. So if those questions come to you, you ought to be able to respond in a way that the executive team or the board members will certainly understand why we have to act now. And this is why we need to deploy XYZ amount of dollars to this risk, because if it does play out, the implications would be way, way, way out of our reach, So.
Yeah, and there's plenty of examples out there. Just go and read some of the, a bleeping computer or something, and you'll find tons of examples of what happens when companies don't follow this kind of advice. So this can definitely help with budgeting. But I have to say, Andrew, you're totally right. It is a different skill set. Like, it's not something whenever I'm asked about budgets, I have to totally shift my mindset. I'm a tech guy, so I don't really think that way a lot of the time. It's
Running a tech part is going to be difficult. You're never going to win with them. It's just not going to go through. But if you're able to bring it down to the level they can appreciate it, because most organizations, as an executive, your goal is to protect the organization and grow the company, right? Anything that could potentially impact that, you are going to listen to it. But if I just talk technical jargon to you all day, you're not going to be able to truly appreciate it, or at least articulate that or translate that to what that means to you as an organization. So your ability as a technical person to speak that business language certainly would help you get that budget through. Yeah.
And I think it's a useful exercise to do as a technical person as well, because thinking about things in those terms actually kind of is quite grounding, because you can get lost in the technical side of things. You can which kind of encryption is better, which VPN is better. But like if you think about what actually is the impact of a vulnerability being exploited successfully against my organization, and what's going to be worse? Will it be the HR data or the backups or the database, whatever? Then it's good to give yourself that kind of perspective, because it will inform how you move forward and what kind of things you look at as a technical person. So yeah,
Absolutely.
it's a useful exercise.
Absolutely.
Awesome. So we are getting close to time, so I want to make sure we are able to get our Q&A session in. So I'm going to kind of shift gears. We have quite a few questions that have come in. That I have one that is actually about budget. If company has a limited budget, how should we prioritize cybersecurity protection? If we consider how the attackers have affected the companies recently, how should we spend our budget? What to do first? Can we rank solutions in order of importance, etc.?
That's a very good question. And I think most organizations are going through that particular point right now. As the market trend stays the way it is, the macroeconomic situation is forcing organizations to make changes. In the past, people used to say, well, cybersecurity is recession free. That's not necessarily true anymore, right? Organizations are making changes. So I think as a functional leader in security, or even the manager or whatever level you are, and if you face your situations like that, I think my advice would be to take an inside look, right? What risk are we faced with? What task must be executed? What can we continue to do? What is relevant for the survival of that company? Security is critical for any organization, but if you don't articulate it properly to your leadership, they're not going to get it. So I think what you need to do, I think in most cases when it's a court, it's never intended to be that way. Sometimes the organization just doesn't have the time, doesn't have the option, right? Court needs to be made, it has to be made, right? So you still have to be able to survive as an organization. What do you do? How do you prioritize what you need to focus your budget on? So understanding the lay of the land, what can we do? What must be done? What can we do? What can we do without? And still be able to run the company and still be able to protect the organization. I think you have to do that level of detail work and then make that articulation to the leadership team. Obviously, it's not going to be the same. Response time may be different. We can't do everything at the pace at which we were doing it before, but we have to be able to understand what is the risk as a result of this court. How can we mitigate that risk? Can we leverage external consultants to help us out? I don't know about renting too, but I mean, that may not be a good option, because of the associated risk with that. But there's got to be a way for you to work around this risk and continue to ensure that the organization is protected.
I'd say one other piece of advice I would give is actually that can help, especially when you're concerned about budget, is to do an inventory of everything you've got running, all the services, all the servers, everything that has been is hanging on to your infrastructure, and get rid of anything you don't need. Any kind of domains or servers or services, like if you've got some task tracking system that was installed a while ago, or a database backup that you've replaced with something else, or any kind of service that are running that VPSs or whatever, it can be really useful to just kind of clean out. The less things you need to support, and you can actually save some money that way, because so inventory is quite an important aspect of it, and making sure that there's nothing. There's always something there that you're like, oh my god, we're still paying for that. So that can be, well, usually gotten rid of, and that might actually help with your budgeting. You can save some money there and spend it somewhere else.
That's true. Very true. Take a stock of it.
This question, they're wondering is there something specific that you would start with under the like firewall updates, DNS filtering, disaster recovery strategy, email cloud security, point security? Is there something there that should be their first piece, or is that kind of vary by organization?
I mean, we kind of have to say pen testing and DNS filtering, right? It's the answers we really should give.
Obligated.
Yeah. I mean, my DNS filtering, I think, is an excellent way of it's easy to deploy, and it's pretty cheap, and it's a good layer. It's not a panacea. There is no silver bullet, like I said. but it's a kind of effective way of kind of deploying a good security layer that isn't a pain. So yeah, I mean, obviously I am very biased working for a company, DNSFilter, but I genuinely do believe it's useful. So what would you say, Andrew?
I agree with Peter completely. I think it depends on your organization, right? You have to be able to, what is relevant to you. I mean, there are different things you can do without necessarily getting into too much of the details. And I'm not doing a shameless plug here, but I think being able to conduct series of pen testing over the course of your different stack is also very critical. It helps you determine, okay, what is my problem here? What are my vulnerabilities here? If I'm moving between one technology to another technology, the only way I can ascertain what risk in there and what risk I'm exposed to is by conducting a series of pen tests across that. Identifying my endpoints, how secure my endpoint is. That a pen test would allow me to make that determination. So pen test is one area you want to certainly look to invest in. PTAS is a good one, sort of the traditional pen testing. PTAS, depending on the type of organization. If you're a SaaS organization, PTAS would be a good solution for you. But firewall is also important, right? Every organization needs firewall, right? You need to be able to protect your parameter and security, whereas, as Peter said before, having to segment some of the network based on criticality of those data within that segment of the network. So there are different things you'll be able to do. I don't think there's a right or wrong way to it. You have to be able to understand your organization, what is critical to your organization, what are the things that are important to you as an organization, and then move from that point.
I think there might be some wrong ways to do it, but no, sorry, I'm just joking. You definitely any approach is better than no approach at all. But I do agree that pen testing is useful, because the thing is that all the things that we're talking about, we kind of are experienced in this area, but getting someone else, getting an expert to assess your vulnerabilities can reveal all these things that you never really thought about in the first place, and it can help inform, where you're going to spend your money. So it can help you prevent wasting money in areas that might not be as important.
Yeah, especially when there's a shortage of security professionals. Deploying pen tests will give you a clear sense of indication where your vulnerabilities are, and then you can now put a plan together. And in most cases, the report will stipulate how you go about mitigating those vulnerabilities. So that would help a lot in organizations that don't have all of the technical skill set and be able to do that in-house. So yeah, I think there's a number of different things you can do to help go through some of those cycles.
Awesome. I hope that was helpful to the person that asked. So we are getting low on time, so we have about one more question that we have time for. And I want to let everyone know that is in the audience that if you have questions that haven't been answered, feel free to respond to the email with the recording in it later, and I can direct you to either Peter or Andrew and get your questions answered. But this one is, what advice would you give to organizations that don't have a dedicated security team? Do you think it's important to dedicate staff that solely focus on this? Or from an organizational standpoint, it can seem advantageous to have security staff who can do IT or vice versa, but does that mean that they're splitting attention and it's not going to work out as well?
I mean, most startups don't have the resources or the budget to hire a full set of security team, right? I mean, there are very good MSP out there that you can leverage, right? They will do everything for you. They manage your risk, they present report to you on a monthly basis. So, but you still need to have one or two dedicated in-house security professionals that work closely with these managed service providers. So whether it's to evaluate your security posture, to do your security monitoring for you, and they have SIEM as a service. They do all of your ingest all of your critical data and do the analysis for you and tell you, hey, these are big alerts, these are small alerts, these are areas you need to focus in on. I think that's something you can do as an organization. From an IT perspective, I think those services are pretty much very they're readily available in the same kind of structure, maybe not exactly as an SMP contract, but I think tech IT is relatively, I don't think it's as expensive as security in terms of building an IT team in place, whether it's just help desk or a support team. So you can certainly do that. I mean, there are consulting companies that will do that for you. They take over your entire technology support, including help desk, which at the end of the day sometimes is relatively cheaper than you have 3 or 4 or 5 IT folks in house. So, but I think MSP is a way to go, particularly from a security standpoint, because they have the skill set and they have the tools, and they can deploy all of this into your environment and really help you manage the security exposure as against you trying to build from scratch, hire a security analyst, a security engineer, a security manager, and try to build from scratch. Just deploying a good MSSP will certainly be very helpful for a startup organization or an organization who's struggling with budget and trying to get their security controls in order.
So yeah, I completely agree, and I think a good MSSP will be able to teach you as well about how you can incorporate a security mindset into your organization, even if you don't have any dedicated staff doing it. I think it needs to be part of the way that you think. And so, like I was saying earlier, that every aspect of operations should be including a kind of, okay, how does this work from a security standpoint? You know, where are we vulnerable in this way? Do we need to? It might be just, you know, we're okay, but making sure that it's part of every step that you go through is important, and that, you know, having a dedicated IT team is a dedicated security team. Sorry, is that they're just going to be the people responsible for making sure that happens. So yeah, outsourcing it is definitely the way to go.
Yeah.
If you don't have your own.
Yep, completely agree with that. And most organizations go through that, and they just don't have the resources to build a complete security team. And if security is not that critical for you as an organization, or it's not a requirement as part of your day-to-day business, there's some organizations that can't do business without demonstrating to a prospective client that they have their security processes in place. So organizations that don't require that, you can easily leverage MSSP to cover all of those requirements. You know, so it just depends on the organization.
Awesome. I think we do have time to squeeze in one last question. This one is how to engage the users to get more into the security aspect of cybersecurity.
I think, well, gamifying it if you can. Make it something that's a challenge for them to you know, make a small reward if somebody can point out security vulnerability. Make it a weekly poll with a little prize for the winner, or, you know, announce a competition each month for something. If you can make people engaged, that's going to help a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. We have a reward system. Every organization that I've worked at tried to implement that, right? So that people look forward to that every month. You know, the folks that conduct themselves practice the best cyber hygiene or whatever you've stipulated for them certainly gets a reward for that, right? And also, you know, it gives you a better sense at the level of sophistication of the user community, right? So if they are making these mistakes, then that tells you, okay, we need to do more work here, right? And we also conduct a number of, you know, tabletop exercises with them to get a sense of their maturity levels, and that would dictate how you put out your reward system, right? So if it's not sophisticated, if it's not critical, and you adapt a different approach. But I think encouraging them, rewarding them is certainly a way to go, and also articulating to them and the importance of doing things the right way, right? Having this acceptable use policy being, you know, evangelized across the organization, so it's clear to them what they can do, what they can do. If they don't know what they can do, what they can do, then they won't even conduct themselves accordingly. But if they are in tune with the acceptable use policy, what is expected of every employee, particularly from a security standpoint, and then they can now conduct themselves accordingly. And then with that reward structure in place, then it starts to make more sense to them. At least now they understand why they have to do it. Because the most difficult part when you're dealing with end users, right? If they are not clear on why you're asking them to do something, they may not do it. But if they have a clear understanding what risk we're trying to mitigate, and then you incorporate a reward system into that, and it becomes a win-win situation for them.
I think that is really great advice. So we are at time now. Thank you both so much for a really great webinar. This has been so informational, and I've enjoyed talking to you. Anyone that anyone that has any questions for Peter or Andrew after this, like I said, you can respond to the email that I'm going to be sending with the recording, and we are going to see you guys next time. So everyone have a great rest of your day.
All right, Peter, good talking with you.
Yes.
And Thanks.
Yeah, it was great talking to you, Andrew. Thanks, Corey. Bye.
All right. Thanks, y'all. Bye.